The same FBI who ruined the life of an innocent man named Joseph Bolanos. He's a registered Democrat who simply appreciated President Trump's policies. The 69-year-old man mostly kept quiet about his politics in his liberal Upper West Side neighborhood of Manhattan, where he was president of his block association for over 2 decades. He attended the Trump speech on January 6, but got nowhere near the Capitol. In fact, he was watching from a Washington hotel room for most of the riot. Nonetheless, someone tipped off authorities that he was there, and the feds stormed his apartment in a pre-dawn raid. They ransacked the place, including the room of his elderly mother, for whom Bolanos cares. And they tipped off local media so that the story was broadcast live on local New York television. While handcuffed in FBI custody for 4 hours, Bolanos suffered a stress-induced stroke. Now, he was never charged, mainly because he did nothing wrong. But he still told the New York Post that the events, quote, destroyed my reputation. If the FBI gets its way, there will be many, many more Joseph Bolanos-style victims out there. Everyday people who are persecuted by the vast powers of federal law enforcement simply for having the wrong politics.
Well, joining us now to discuss the FBI and its tactics, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. Congressman, great to have you on the program tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jen.
So you sit here and you listen to Steve's monologue. Steve and I are on this America First program, have to wonder if we might be spied on. And what's to say that they're not looking at our audience out there as well?
Here's what we know. The FBI is not getting better. They're getting worse. During the Russia hoax, we exposed the fact that the FBI was using its power to push its politics on the country and to try to achieve more power by getting rid of their critics. Now we see that since there wasn't accountability as a result of the Russia hoax at the scale that there should have been, they're getting even more ambitious, and they're targeting even more Americans like those Steve mentioned. And this harkens to a darker day, Jen. I mean, back during the worst days of the Soviet Union, 1 out of every 3 of the folks in that country was providing some sort of information to a centralized governing authority. And so snitching really is a tool of the repressive security state, and we don't want that to happen in our country.
Congressman, I want to ask you about the reaction of Rick Grinnell, the former DNI of the United States. He was reacting to that terrible tweet put out by the FBI, and here's what Rick Grinnell had to say. He said, "This is outrageous. The FBI has a growing credibility problem, and this type of sinister snitching is clearly unhelpful. Why hasn't the FBI made more progress finding the BLM rioters from last summer? Why hasn't the FBI leadership apologized for the Russia hoax they pushed?" So, Congressman, I'd like your reaction to Rick Grinnell, and also to know if you agree with him that it seems as though the FBI is totally focused in the wrong places.
Yeah, I do, and Rick Grinnell's point shows the actual cost of the FBI being so misaligned in their priorities. When the FBI is busy trying to make us all believe that our family members and our neighbors are extremists, we miss the opportunity to actually dig into important threats, cybersecurity threats, national security threats that they should be focused on. And it's really rich as a Floridian to hear the FBI say, well, if you'll just call us more about your extremist family members, then we'll spring into action. Because when the FBI was called about the specific actions, the specific training of the Parkland shooter from a neighbor, they totally dropped the ball. And so now this isn't really a sincere effort to engage in law enforcement. This is an effort to identify people based on their politics. And I don't think we want an FBI that is resolving familial disputes through the lens of extremism. That seems to really take them away from an otherwise important mission.
Congressman, I think most Americans want to think that the intel community does not have a political agenda. We saw with James Comey, he had a political agenda with Trump. Should most Americans now, be concerned that perhaps the FBI does have a political agenda?
When did the FBI not have a political agenda? I mean, let's remember who the building's named after. J. Edgar Hoover would use information in a compromising way against politicians and people to be able to maintain his own power. And then you saw the FBI really weaponized against elements of the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. And now you see the FBI really becoming the enforcement wing of the Democratic Party in a lot of circumstances. The interconnectivity between the FBI the liars in the mainstream media, present company, of course, excluded, and really, the power centers of Washington, D.C. should trouble all of us. And the problem now is without Trump around, they're not targeting him as much as they're targeting regular Americans who engage in lawful activity. And if they can't find you, they want your own family members to report you. That I don't think the FBI really knows what they're asking for here. It's going to erode their ability to do important work, and it's going to entangle them in all kind of nonsense.
Well, and if
Sure.
you're involved with Antifa or BLM rioters, of course, they'll look the other way.
Well, and that is reflected when Christopher Wray comes to testify before Congress. He spends all this time talking about the great ills and threats of white supremacy and extremism. And he says these things as the BLM and Antifa rioters are actually taking action that results in a great deal of death and destruction and harm in our country. It's more a woketopia than it is a law enforcement entity.
Matt, I want to ask you about your personal situation with federal law enforcement, because, of course, there's a lot of innuendo and rumor and speculation. I want to give you the chance to speak to it here directly to the people of your district and the people of America. And also, you can speak about it broadly, but also specifically if you believe you have been targeted for political reasons by federal law enforcement.
Well, I'll put it this way, Steve. I don't think anybody at the Department of Justice or FBI thinks the way to make their career is to actually make the case against people like Hunter Biden or their associates. I think instead there's a desire to obtain political scalps. We see that with Rudy Giuliani. We saw that with Michael Flynn, and perhaps that's the case with me as well. I'll let the facts bear out. And, right now as I chat with you, gosh, the New York Times and CNN and everything they've all tried to smear me and take me out of the Congress, but I'm still fighting for my constituents, and I'm still serving on the Oversight Committee for the FBI.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, guys.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.